Italy, 1944. The Gothic line was supposed to be an unbreakable wall of German steel. But in the misty valleys of the Apennine Mountains, a new kind of terror began to haunt the Wehrmacht. It wasn't a carpet bombing or a tank division. It was a single rifle shot, echoing once, then silence. One by one, German officers were falling not in the heat of battle, but in the supposed safety of their own bunkers. The Germans sent their best counter-snipers to find the shadow, but they found nothing. No footprints, no muzzle flash, no scent. They began to whisper about a black ghost who could walk through walls and vanish into thin air. Little did they know, they were looking right at him. His secret wasn't a high-tech gadget or a German-made lens. It was a camouflage method so simple, yet so brilliant, that it defied every rule in the German sniper manual. A method that would eventually claim 500 enemy casualties before the war was over. This is the untold story of the man who became invisible. Part 1. The Buffalo Soldier. Oh, the German High Command. The soldiers of the 92nd Infantry Division were an anomaly. They called them Buffalo Soldiers, a name inherited from the 19th century frontier. But to the American society of 1944, they were second-class citizens. This is the irony of our story. The sniper we are talking about, let us call him Sergeant Jackson, was fighting two wars at once. One against the Nazi tyranny in the mountains of Italy, and another against the prejudice in his own camp. Jackson didn't grow up in a military academy. He grew up in the deep woods of Mississippi. While other kids were playing with toys, Jackson was hunting to put food on the table. In the dense, humid swamps, he learned the first rule of survival. If they see you, you lose. If you see them first, you eat. He learned the stillness. He could sit in a thicket for 6 hours without blinking, watching the way shadows moved and how birds signaled a predator's approach. He didn't know it then, but the Jim Crow laws of the South were his first instructors in camouflage. In a world where a black man had to be invisible to stay safe, Jackson became a master of the unseen. When he arrived in Italy with the 92nd, his white officers were skeptical. They gave the Buffalo Soldiers the most dangerous, thankless sectors of the Gothic line, the jagged peaks where the German Gebirgsjäger, the elite mountain troops, held every advantage. The Germans looked down from their stone bunkers, laughing. They saw the red buffalo patch on the Americans' shoulders and thought they were easy prey. But Jackson had his M1903 Springfield, a rifle as cold and steady as his nerves. He didn't fire during the day. He watched. He mapped the German routines. He noticed that the German snipers followed a European manual. They looked for silhouettes, for movement, for the glint of a lens. Jackson realized that to kill 500 men, he couldn't just hide behind a bush. He had to become the bush. He had to understand the physics of light and the psychology of the human eye. He began to experiment with a method that combined his childhood hunting skills with a radical understanding of visual disruption. While his fellow soldiers were struggling with the cold and the bias of their commanders, Jackson was in the shadows, perfecting a ghost story that would soon leave 500 German helmets empty. He wasn't just fighting for a country that didn't love him back. He was fighting to prove that the man they refused to see was the most dangerous man on the battlefield. Part 2. The Secret Method. The German Sniper Manual, the Scharfschützenvorschrift, was the most advanced of its time. It taught soldiers to look for SSI, shape, shadow, and iron glint. If you broke your silhouette, stayed in the dark, and covered your glass, you were supposed to be invisible. But Sergeant Jackson knew a secret that the Germans, with their pale skin and rigid training, could never master. He understood that in the jagged, scorched terrain of the Italian Gothic line, green and brown camouflage was a death sentence. The mountains weren't green. They were gray, black, and filled with deep, cavernous shadows. Jackson developed a method he called the deep absorption. While other snipers used standard-issued face paint that had a waxy, reflective base, Jackson looked back to the swamps of Mississippi. He mixed fine graphite dust, crushed charred wood from burnt-out farmhouses and a specific type of dark Italian clay. The result wasn't just black paint. It was a matte coating that absorbed nearly 100% of available light. In physics, this is known as a black body effect. When the German observers used their high-powered Zeiss binoculars, their lenses were looking for reflectance, the way light bounces off a surface. But when their gaze passed over Jackson, there was nothing for the light to bounce back from. He was a hole in the world. But his genius didn't stop at his skin. He realized that the human eye is drawn to the V shape of the shoulders and the O shape of the head. To break this, Jackson didn't just use a ghillie suit. He used negative space camouflage. He would find a dark crevice in the rocks or a charred tree trunk and position himself behind a layer of debris, not on top of it. He would use the natural shadows of the mountain to create a second, deeper shadow. There was also the factor of his skin tone. Jackson realized that his dark skin, when treated with his graphite mixture, provided a natural base that white soldiers struggled to achieve even with thick paint. Paint on pale skin often cracks or sweats off, creating hot spots of reflection. Jackson's deep absorption method bonded with his skin, making him part of the darkness itself. In the formula for Fresnel reflection, R represents the light reflected. By matching the refractive index of his camouflage to the deep shadows of the Apennine caves, Jackson brought R as close to zero as mathematically possible. The Germans were looking for a man hiding in the bushes. They weren't looking for a patch of darkness that was slightly darker than the cave behind it. They were looking for a presence. Jackson gave them an absence. He would lie motionless for 14 hours, his rifle barrel wrapped in soot-covered canvas, his breath filtered through a dark cloth to hide the winter mist. He didn't just hide from the Germans. He hid from the very laws of optics. And from that nothingness, a .3006 bullet would emerge, traveling at 2,800 feet per second, ending a German life before the sound of the shot even reached their ears. The 500 casualties weren't just a result of good aim. They were the result of a man who had mastered the art of being no one, nowhere. Part 3. The Predator and the Prey. By the winter of 1944, the name the Black Ghost was no longer a rumor in the German trenches. It was a curse. 500 men. 500 empty helmets. The Gothic line was bleeding, and the morale of the Wehrmacht was shattering. The German High Command decided that a colonial could not be this good. They believed it was a fluke, a statistical error. So they sent for their best. From the elite sniper school in Zossen, they brought in Major Hans Wolfgang. Wolfgang was a machine. He had over 300 confirmed kills on the Eastern Front. He was a man who saw the world in grids, angles, and wind speeds. He carried the Mauser 98K with a 6x Zeiss scope, the finest optics on the planet. He didn't just hunt, he analyzed. When Wolfgang arrived at the Gothic line, he didn't go to the front lines immediately. For 3 days, he sat in a darkened room, studying the locations where Jackson's victims had fallen. He noticed something that chilled him. There was no pattern. No favorite spots. No predictable sniper's nests. It was as if the mountain itself was spitting out bullets. "He isn't hiding in the terrain," Wolfgang whispered to his adjutant. "He's the terrain." The duel took place on a jagged peak known as the Devil's Tooth. It was a graveyard of gray limestone and charred pines. Wolfgang moved at night, using every German trick in the book. He set up decoys helmets perched on sticks to draw fire. He used flash simulators to trick the enemy into revealing their position. But Jackson? Jackson was a mile away, buried deep inside a crack in a scorched cliffside. He wasn't looking for helmets. He was looking for life. Jackson knew a secret that Wolfgang's textbooks didn't teach. The human eye can be fooled by shape, but the human soul can be felt through the rhythm of the mountain. Jackson didn't use his eyes to scan the horizon. He used his peripheral awareness. He waited for the birds to stop singing. He waited for a single pebble to roll. For 48 hours, neither man moved. They lay in the freezing mud, their pulses slowed to the point of hibernation. Wolfgang, the machine, was starting to crack. The cold was seeping into his bones. His breath was creating a tiny, almost invisible mist, and that was his fatal mistake. Wolfgang had a white camouflage suit for the snow, but he forgot the carbon rule. Every time he exhaled, the warm air from his lungs hit the frozen air, creating a microcloud. To an ordinary soldier, it was nothing. To Sergeant Jackson, it was a beacon. Jackson didn't rush. He adjusted his unertl scope by a fraction of a millimeter. He calculated the gravity drop of the .30-06 round over 800 yards. In his mind, he wasn't shooting a man. He was returning a piece of lead to the earth. Squeeze. The recoil hit Jackson's shoulder like a familiar friend. 800 yards away, Major Hans Wolfgang, the pride of Zossen, the master of the Eastern Front, never even heard the sound. The bullet struck the center of his Zeiss lens, shattering the perfect German optics before burying itself in the brain of the man who thought he was the ultimate predator. The machine had been broken by the ghost, and as Jackson slowly retreated into the deepening shadows, his graphite-covered face blending into the night, he didn't feel joy. He only felt the weight of number 501. The Germans had sent their best to kill a colonial, but they had forgotten that a man who has lived his whole life in the shadows of oppression doesn't fear the dark. He owns it. Part 4. The Mass Casualties. The death of Major Hans Wolfgang was a thunderclap that echoed all the way to Berlin. When his body was recovered, his perfect Zeiss scope shattered. A single hole through his forehead. The German soldiers in the sector stopped looking at the Americans as enemies. They started looking at the mountains as monsters. They called it Scharfschützenphobie, sniper phobia. Sergeant Jackson didn't stop with Wolfgang. In fact, the duel had only sharpened his instincts. He realized that the German command was in a state of leadership vacuum. They were paralyzed, waiting for orders, waiting for a ghost to show its face. Jackson decided it was time to move from static defense to aggressive harassment. He began a campaign that would bring his total to 500, a number that sounds like a myth, but was a cold, hard reality of the Italian campaign. His method of achieving mass casualties wasn't through a machine gun. It was through the Echo Labyrinth. Jackson understood the acoustics of the Apennine Mountains better than any German engineer. He targeted the system. First, the officers. Then the radio operators. Then, the men carrying the soup kettles. He cut off their communication and their food. The German 4th Mountain Division, some of the toughest men in the Wehrmacht, found themselves trapped in their own bunkers. They were afraid to go to the latrine. They were afraid to light a cigarette. Jackson, covered in his graphite and clay skin, would crawl within 50 yards of their lines at night. He wasn't just shooting, he was listening. He learned their names. He learned their fears. Then, in the gray light of dawn, he would strike. One morning, a German supply convoy of 15 trucks tried to push through the pass. Jackson was waiting. He didn't shoot the drivers. He shot the lead truck's engine block, then the last truck's tires. The convoy was pinned. For 4 hours, Jackson systematically picked off every soldier who tried to run for cover. He moved every 2 shots, a ghost drifting through the freezing mist. His M1903 Springfield barking the funeral march for an entire platoon. The Germans fired thousands of rounds of mortar fire and machine gun bursts into the shadows, but they were shooting at ghosts. Jackson was already gone, buried in a new hole, his dark eyes watching their frustration. By the end of that week, the casualty count was staggering. The Buffalo Soldier had done more to halt the German advance than a whole battalion of artillery. He had turned the Gothic line into a 500-man graveyard, all without a single scratch on his own skin. But the final cost wasn't just measured in German lives. It was measured in the soul of the man in the shadows. To kill 500 men, you have to leave a piece of your humanity behind in every shell casing. Part 5. The Unseen Hero. May 1945. The war in Europe was over. The guns that had echoed through the Apennine Mountains for years finally fell silent. As the German units began to emerge from their holes to surrender, they had one question for their American captors. They didn't ask about the tanks. They didn't ask about the planes. They asked to see the Black Ghost. When Sergeant Jackson finally stepped out of the shadows, he wasn't wearing his graphite mask. He was just a man. A young, tired man with a Springfield rifle and eyes that had seen too much. The German officers who met him were stunned into silence. Their racial theories, their Übermensch arrogance, and their military pride crumbled in that single moment. They realized they had been defeated by a man they had been told was inferior. Jackson didn't gloat. He didn't demand an apology. He simply handed over his rifle and prepared to go home. But for Sergeant Jackson and the 500 men he had claimed, the homecoming was the hardest battle of all. When the 92nd Infantry Division returned to the United States, there were no ticker tape parades in New York for them. As Jackson crossed the border into his home state of Mississippi, he had to take off his uniform. In the eyes of the law in the South, he wasn't a hero who had killed 500 Nazis. He was still just a black man who had to use the colored-only entrance. His medals, the Silver Stars and Bronze Stars, were tucked away in a cigar box under his bed. For decades, Jackson lived a quiet life. He worked in the fields, he raised a family, and he never spoke about the deep absorption or the duel at the Devil's Tooth. To his neighbors, he was just a quiet old man. To history, he was invisible once again. But the 500 lives he took had a mathematical ripple effect. In the late 1990s, the world finally began to listen. The stories of the Buffalo Soldiers were pulled from the dusty archives. Medals of honor were finally awarded to the men who had been bypassed because of the color of their skin. And while Jackson's name might not be in every textbook, his graphite method is still studied in dark corners of elite sniper schools today. The lesson of the Black Ghost is a simple one. Excellence is the ultimate form of rebellion. Sergeant Jackson didn't just kill 500 soldiers. He killed a lie. He proved that when the lights go out and the world turns to shadows, the only thing that matters is your skill, your heart, and your will to survive. He was the man they refused to see, yet he was the only one who could see them. He was the ghost that haunted an empire. And today, when we look at the red buffalo patch, we don't just see a soldier. We see the reminder that the most dangerous weapon in the world is on a rifle. It's the human spirit that refuses to be ignored. The Black Ghost has finally found peace. But in the silence of the mountains, if you listen closely, you can still hear the echo of a single shot, a reminder that some heroes are best found in the dark.